Deuteronomy chapter 34. Hear the word of the Lord. Then Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo to the top of Pisgah, which is opposite Jericho. And the Lord showed him all the land, Gilead as far as Dan, all Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, the Negeb, and the plain, that is the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees, as far as Zoar. And the Lord said to him, "This is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to your offspring. I will let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not go over there." So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he buried him in the valley of the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor. But no one knows the place of his burial to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was undimmed and his vigor unabated. And the people of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. Then the days of weeping and mourning for Moses were ended. And Joshua the son of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands on him. So the people of Israel obeyed him and did as the Lord had commanded Moses. And there has not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. None like him for all the signs and wonders that the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his servants and to all his land, and for all the mighty power and all the great deeds of terror that Moses did in the sight of all Israel. May the Lord add his blessings to the reading of his holy word. Well, do you like to wait? Probably not. I don't know anyone who likes to wait. The time seems to drag by. If you go to some appointment and you're waiting to be called up or whatever, just time is creeping by. And so now we fill our time probably looking at our phone, texting or Facebook or doing some game or watch some video. But then we have to wait for some of that. We might have to wait for a video to load. Studies show this. People will start to get impatient after about 2 seconds of a video of loading. After 5 seconds, 25% of people will quit and just cancel it and do something else. If the time doubles to 10 seconds, the number of cancellations double to 50%. That may be because we've all had the experience of waiting on something like a video loading that never came. It said loading and loading for minutes and finally nothing. The website was down or the connection was lost or whatever. I've waited for an appointment and it never came. I went to the waiting room and sat there. My name was never called. I've waited for someone who never came. I've waited and waited, worked for some achievement, for some recognition that never happened. I've waited for someone to finally start being reasonable. That never happened. I've waited at that door right there on Sunday mornings for someone to come who never did. I've waited for a check in the mail that never appeared. We're told good things come to those who wait, but then sometimes we waited and no thing came. The pain of waiting is the fear that we're waiting for nothing. Do you hate to wait? Maybe you're waiting for a wedding or a career to start, a graduation, for the government to do something. Mike and Nancy have been waiting for years to get their green card. They finally got it just this past week. Guess the waiting's finally over. You wait for the government to finally do what it's supposed to do. Maybe you wait for someone to come around. You wait for some things that are just more mundane, like test results to come back, for a repairman to show up. You call him, he says he's going to get right back to you, but you're waiting. Nothing seems to happen. It's been 2 months since we twice called a lawnmower repairman that we needed his help. Gave him the details. He said he took it all down, said he was going to get right back to us, and he still hasn't called back. At some point, you feel like you have to give up waiting and go on to the next guy. Once at a restaurant in Danville, they were taking so long to get my order to me, pancakes, that I set a deadline. If they don't have it ready within 30 minutes of when I ordered, then I'm leaving. And they didn't. I gave up waiting. When do you give up waiting? When do you go from that assurance, just you wait and see, it's going to come? When do you go from that to saying, I'm done waiting? Of course, it really depends on who you're waiting on. If we're waiting on a lawnmower repair guy or a landscaper who forgot us or a receptionist, who lost track of our appointment, or you're waiting on someone who's just not reliable. He said he's going to do this or that. He's going to install cable TV or repair our car. Well, your patience in waiting is probably pretty short. Or maybe we're waiting on someone we trust for the bride or the groom to show up at the wedding. How relaxed we are while waiting depends mostly on how confident we are in the person we're waiting on. Some repairman we hardly know, we might not be sure that they'll come through, and so we might be angry if he or she made us wait the whole afternoon and didn't show up. If we're confident in the person we're waiting on, but someone else says, he or she isn't coming, just give up, you're going to be stood up. You reply, no, I know. Just you wait and see. He'll be here. Wait and see. How long are you willing to wait? What if you have to wait for something your whole life? Now, sure, you see parts of it. You get a taste of it here and there. A vision of glory, of joy, of fulfillment, of perfection. A glimpse in the eyes of your heart, maybe of God. But only enough to keep you waiting. Now, sure, you get some things now. You get a sense, you get a confidence, a stream of joy, a slice of peace, an encounter deep in your heart with something glorious of the presence of God. But it's just a tiny spoonful. Like one of those mini spoons they give you for a taste test at a grocery store. It's like that. Just enough to make you want to go, wow, I want more. For us, enough to enable us to wait. Now, sure, we get some things now. We get promises. We get justifications, be made right with God. We get the Holy Spirit, the down payment. We get enough confidence that we can say, just you wait and see. But still, for much, we have to wait. It's now, some things now, and some things not yet. And for now, we have to believe good things come to those who wait. Here we see waiting in the now for the not yet. We see that in 4 parts. First, the sight. Second, the servant. Third, the succession. And finally, the summary. First, Moses has already given us his last words. He's been told to die. He's been commanded to die at the end of chapter 32. He gives his last blessings in chapter 33 we looked at last week. And now, this is the end. This is it. But it's an odd ending, isn't it? Particularly of the Pentateuch, isn't it? All through the Pentateuch, from Genesis to here, there's been this promise, you're going to get this land, you're going to get the offspring and blessing of the nations, and they're right on the verge, and then you end here. It's what we've been told all through the book of Deuteronomy that is coming. 7 times in this book, Moses is told that he will see the land, but won't be able to go into it. So it's not a surprise, but we just know. You read this chapter, the way it's described, the words, the feeling, that this isn't really the end. This is a waiting room. Moses is dying, but wait and see. See that we have some things now while waiting for the rest. Israel has some of the promised land. East of the Jordan. Now, much to their surprise, by the way, Moses can see the fulfillment of the promises, the covenants to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He can see it right across the river. There it is. And yet he doesn't quite get there. And even if we've never read the Bible before, imagine you would have never read the Bible before, you knew nothing about its story, this is the first time you come to the end, Deuteronomy here, you would know. You would just know, yeah, sure, you understand you have to wait for a while. Moses has to wait to get the promise, to get what they've been waiting on. But we'd know, wouldn't you? Even if you're just reading this for the first time, that just you wait and see. We might have to wait for now, but the fulfillment is coming. We can be confident of that. Moses is what is called in verse 1, the plains of Moab, but his territory that they had just recently conquered from the Moabites and was now theirs. Here's a picture, by the way, this whole thing. So imagine this scene. He's in Israelite territory. They take it from the Moabites. And this is a picture of the Christian life. We get promised glory, but it's not yet. It's just across the river. You can see it, but you think, well, you'll just have to wait and see. And so you say, because you're confident in the one who promises, yes, Lord, I'll wait. I can't wait, but I'll wait. And then we find, much to our amazement, like here, Israel is already in the promised land. Sort of. They had come up to the Jordan. Remember the story, the history. They come up to the Jordan. They were attacked by the Moabites, then later by Sihon and Og, these kingdoms that were east of the Jordan River. Right? They were attacked by them. They defended themselves. The Lord gave them victory over those kingdoms. And so they conquered this land that at first they were not planning on taking. Remember that. They had no plans at all in taking this land. They thought they would just pass through, and then they were going to cross the Jordan, and then they were going to conquer. That was their plan. But they were attacked on the east side of the Jordan before they crossed. And so they defended themselves, and then they end up with this land. And then they're told, before this, imagine, they had thought all their inheritance was west of the river. And then they won all this land east of the river. And they're told, this, where you're standing, this is already the promised land. It's part of it. You're already partly in it. This is a picture of the Christian life. Now, sure, most of the promises are not yet. You'll have to wait. But then you find, to your amazement, to your surprise, that some is already, that you're already there. You're already in part in glory. You're already in part in the future. The glories of the future are already partly present. There's already a sense of heaven in your life, a joy, a love, a fulfillment. You don't have to wait for it all. Moses is now in the promised land. He's in maybe call it the now promised land. And he wants to see the not yet promised land. So he climbs Mount Nebo. Now he's in pretty good shape for an old man, right? To be able to climb a mountain. 120 years old and he climbs a mountain. And there in verse 1, the Lord showed him, the Lord showed him all the land. Now the Lord has to show him. Notice the way that's put. The Lord showed him. The Lord has to do that because it's not just a natural view. It's not just a vista that he could just see naturally with his eyes. Because he's seeing much further than you could see normally, naturally. This is a supernaturally aided view. Like if you've been to some vista, sometimes these telescopes, I haven't seen them in years, but maybe I assume they still have them. These telescopes that if you put in a quarter, you'll get your vision aided so you can see further. Well, here the Lord supernaturally aided his vision so that he could see the entire land, starting due north where he is, what's called Gilead, then to the far north, the northern border of Israel, which is Dan. By the way, Dan River, and so Danville was named by surveyors from North Carolina, marking the far northern boundary of North Carolina and naming it after the northern boundary of Israel. Dan, that's where Danville gets his name. He sees, here, Moses sees as far as the Mediterranean Sea, the Negev desert in the south. He gets full sight of the promised land. He's partly in it already, but to be fully in it, he's going to have to wait. As he's looking at this site, the Lord says in verse 4, this is the land. See? You can see it. You don't have to wait for it all. This is the land that I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to your offspring. The Lord reminds Moses of the covenant that he made with Israel, that they will be given this land. They are on the verge of seeing God fulfill that covenant. After over 400 years of waiting, it's right in sight. The wait is almost over. And here the covenant was made all the way back with Abraham, beginning in Genesis 15. Now, the first 11 chapters, think of the big picture of the Bible. The first 11 chapters of Genesis are about the creation, and there's the fall into sin, there's the spiraling downward, things get worse and worse. There's the flood judgment, there's the Tower of Babel. And then, immediately after all that, nations disperse. Immediately, God calls Abraham and promises him land, offspring, and to be a blessing to the nations. And God makes a covenant with him, and he tells him to cut some animals in half, which is part of the covenant cutting ceremony in their day, in their culture. in which two men wanted to bind themselves and would make a covenant, wanted to bind themselves with an agreement. They would cut some animals in half and then walk between the pieces and say, may what happened to these animals, we're walking through, may what happened to these animals happen to me if I break this covenant. So it's a way of making a contract, really more important than a contract, like a covenant. In Genesis chapter 15, God does that with Abraham. He tells Abraham to make the covenant, or at least put the pieces together, get ready for the covenant cutting ceremony. But then, now normally both parties would go through the animals as they're covenanting with each other. But in Genesis 15, God puts Abraham into a strange kind of, you would call it sleep, kind of in quotation marks, not really a sleep, it's kind of a catatonic state, because Abraham can see, he knows what's going on, but he can't move. And it says there, a flaming torch and a smoking pot symbolizing God. They go through the pieces of the animals, but Abraham cannot. He can't do it. He can't do his part. He's incapable. He's been immobilized. That shows that the covenant depends entirely on God. God is saying, from Genesis 15, may what happened to these animals happen to me. And of course, that's impossible, right? God's not going to be cut in half, not going to die. May what happened to these animals happen to me if I break this covenant. So you know, if you're reading the Bible for the first time, you had no idea what it said. You would know that whatever happens in the rest of the Bible, God will keep this covenant. Well, that's the beginning of the Pentateuch in Genesis. Now at the very end, the Lord reminds Moses of that covenant. The covenant promised this land. It's a place for people, God's people, to live in, to dwell in peace and safety with God's presence there. It also promised offspring, many stars of the sky, and to be a blessing to the nations. Now that Moses sees that God will soon fulfill that land part of the covenant, he can be assured, and we can be assured, that he will fulfill it all, that there will be an offspring who will be a blessing to all kinds of people. You can be assured of that. You can say, just you wait and see. But for now, he has to wait. Well, we're partly in the promised land. Everything is not yet. We can see the rest of the promised land right across the river. And with the Lord's help, we get an overview of it all. All of it is beyond our comprehension. We can't see all the details, but we can see the big picture laid out before us. We can see it, and for attaining it, to have it, well, we'll have to wait. We are right now waiting and seeing. We're waiting and seeing with his servants. From verses 5 to 8, we hear of Moses, the servant of the Lord, and his death. And we see two things about that. The servant of the Lord and his death. First, the Lord has servants whom we're to follow. And second, they die. Now, first, the Lord has servants in verse 5. Now, we might think, well, we're all servants of God. Well, hopefully that's true for us here. But here in the Old Testament, that title, servant of the Lord, is reserved for a few great leaders. Like Abraham, here Moses, next Joshua, David, and then someone mysteriously called my servant. In Isaiah 42:53, behold my servant, whom I uphold, my chosen, in whom my soul delights. My servant shall act wisely. He shall be high and lifted up, shall be exalted. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. These are the Lord's servants, the great men whom he has made covenants with, whom he has used to save his people. Now, there's a debate in history among historians between kinds of history, how to study history. It's what one kind called great man history, in which history is told is basically the story of one great man after another, of great men, maybe some women, who made the difference, who decisively changed the course of history. You know, people like Caesar, Constantine, Charlemagne. In China, Emperor Qin Shi Huang, Washington, Lincoln, Churchill, men like that. History is the story of one great man after another. At least that's one school of thought. The other is a social history. It's like in Marxism, in which history is like a clash of classes. You have the workers versus the property owners, the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie. And now some are trying to make it a clash of races. And the leaders are just shaped by the environment of their society. They just kind of represent whatever predominant class is in power at the time, that is dominant at the time. The Bible is definitely, I believe, a great man history. But the men aren't the ones ultimately changing things. Like in social history, these men, these leaders, are being carried along by forces outside their control, but it's not by society. It's not by their environment. They're being carried along by God. Abraham was carried along by God to the land to be given a covenant with God. Moses here is God's great man to lead them out of Egypt. Without Moses, there's no Exodus. But without God, there's no Moses. And with God, it's impossible that there not be a Moses. The same for David, and of course, that servant of the Lord Isaiah saw, who fulfills all the promises to the other great men. The Lord has a servant he will use to save his people. And second, they die. That's kind of important, because our temptation is to put so much of our faith, our trust in the great man. But then they die. And what happens to our faith when they die? The Lord's servants die. That's important to keep in mind. In verse 5, so, because of what just happened, because the Lord gave Moses a look at the promised land, he told him that he could see it. Moses gets to see it, but he couldn't go into it yet. Because now that's done, Moses now has had as much of now as the Lord will give him. And then, after that, the only thing left for him to do is wait. And he will wait in death. So, because he's seen the land, Moses, the servant of the Lord, he's the Lord's servant, died there on that mountain, at that vista, after getting to see that the Lord will keep his covenant. What did he die of? Well, you might think, well, he's 120 years old. Obviously, he died of old age. But verse 7 says that his eye was undimmed and his vigor unabated. He was in good shape, in other words. He didn't die of old age. He died at the end of verse 5 according to the word of the Lord. The Lord told him to die, and he obeyed. So Moses dies on the mountain after getting to see that God is fulfilling his covenant. And then in verse 6, it's the Lord, buried him. Moses. He buried Moses in the valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, but no one knows the place of his burial to this day. So God himself buries Moses' body, and even in death, Moses is outside the promised land. He's going to have to wait. How did the Lord bury Moses? This passage doesn't say, but Jude 9 says something strange, unusual verse. The archangel Michael, contending with the devil, was disputing with the body of Moses. That's kind of spurs your imagination. What in the world is going on there? Apparently, Michael the archangel, maybe I'm reading a little bit into this, but it seems to imply at least, that Michael the archangel was God's agent, sent by God to bury Moses' body, and yet the devil wanted it. So there was a conflict there between Michael and the devil. Now, you might think, well, why in the world would the devil want Moses' body? What would the devil want to do with the body of Moses? What an odd thing. Just a bizarre idea. A strange verse in Jude 9, whose point is, by the way, that we're not to be speaking to demons. We're not to be cursing them, to principalities and powers. That's not our place, because not even Michael did that. But why do you think the devil would want the body of Moses? What's he going to do with it? Probably to get Israel to do the very thing that the Lord avoided by having him buried in a secret grave. Why did the Lord want Moses buried secretly? Now, if you come from a culture of ancestor veneration, the answer to that is probably obvious. It's just, you say, yeah, of course. We know why. Moses was such a monumental leader. If he had died like most people, leaving a body behind, they would have built a shrine to it. Some people would have, over time, made sacrifices to it, claimed it had supernatural powers, that if you burn incense at the shrine of Moses' gravesite, you'll get whatever you ask in prayer, or something like that. A cult would have developed around it. Veneration of the dead is one of the most common instincts in fallen people. Because part of the reason why, well, people are attached to the one who has died, especially as this great man. And also, no one wants to be the one who says that respecting that dead person's grave is meaningless, that you're not doing anything, the person can't hear you. No one wants to be the one who says that. You sound cruel and heartless. Like when one of Mary's aunts cajoled her after her grandmother died, and she would not join in on the ancestor veneration. Don't you love your grandmother? What's wrong with you? That you disrespect your dead relative. And most people think, okay, I'll go along. What do I have to lose? Now, how much more here, a great prophet? Now, I know someone in Danville who every day, at least according to his own admission, every day he goes to his mother's gravesite. He keeps it very nicely with lights that illuminate it at night. He's turned it into a shrine. He often leaves flowers, and he takes a picture of the grave and posts it on Facebook with a caption like, "Visiting my family." Now, here's someone who is not raised in the culture of ancestor veneration, where it's normal, but he's doing it anyway. If he was in Singapore, he'd be in a temple every day with his joss sticks, bringing some food, and he would be considered very filial. Here, he does it every day, does the equivalent, and he thinks he's a Christian. If Israel had been left the body of Moses, they would have turned his grave into a shrine and become idolatrous because of it. That's how, by the way, in history, that's how icon veneration and praying to saints got into the church. That was at least one of the ways it got in the door, because it began with relics. It began with the bodies of great martyrs, like Polycarp. When Polycarp is a disciple of John, who's the leader of the church in Smyrna, when he was martyred, he was burned at the stake by a Roman governor in the year 155, the Christians wanted, of course, to honor him. He was their great leader. He was their great man. And so they wanted to honor him by honoring his remains. And his remains are called relics. And so their thinking is you show respect for the man, and you respect this man, and you deserve respect. But the thinking is you show respect for the man by respecting his body. You give it a special burial. Maybe you make special visits to it. Maybe at particular times, like the anniversary of his death. And soon one thing leads to another, and you have a shrine and a cult that builds around the memory of this great person. To stop that from even starting in Israel, the Lord buries Moses in secret. Remember, we always make idols out of good things. Jesus didn't tell us, whoever loves drunkenness more than me is not worthy of me. He didn't say that, did he? He didn't say, whoever loves sexual immorality more than me is not worthy of me. Now that's true, of course, but we already know that. Everybody already knows that. It's the good things. The good things we're tempted to make idols out of. The loving grandmother, or the spiritual leader, the one who showed us the way of life, the celebrity pastor, or the mother, or spouse, or child. It's people like that we're tempted to make idols out of. Like here, don't even start. You can respect and love the departed like they did here for Moses. They mourn losing him for 30 days. They have a whole month. They go through a process of grieving. You respect the dead, particularly those who deserve respect, like Moses, but you don't make shrines to them. You don't burn incense to them. You don't bow to them. You don't kiss their pictures as if you're kissing them. You don't do anything like that. Don't even allow that kind of veneration to start. Remember, all God's servants die. So don't venerate them, except for the one who has risen from the dead. That last servant who turns out to be the Lord himself. As for the others, even Moses, even the one who led you out of slavery, even your favorite preacher, your relative who shared the gospel with you, don't build shrines, even in your heart, to them. Wait and see for a succession. In verse 9, the baton is passed to Joshua. He succeeds Moses. The leader is dead. Long live the leader. God's work is always bigger than the best of his workmen. So when it's God at work, he supplies other workmen to replace the one he took. Here is Joshua. Joshua the son of Nun, it says, was full of the spirit of wisdom. Moses himself laid his hands on him, prayed for him, conferred on him his authority. He is now the successor. And that spirit of wisdom means he had a heart that went the right way, that feared the Lord, and so sought to follow the Lord. He'll be the one, Joshua will be, at his death, as his final words, who will challenge Israel to decide, to follow the Lord. Who to follow? Is for me and my house, he says, we will serve the Lord. That's that spirit of wisdom. He will finish what Moses started. Right? For God to complete his covenant, his promise, he used both Moses and Joshua. Here, Moses can't bring the people into the promised land. He called, I should say. I guess he could have done it any way he wanted. I shouldn't say God needed. He called Joshua to do that, to finish what he started. He calls a successor. Moses needed a successor. Both Moses and Joshua portray parts of the ministry of Jesus together. That's the way we are too. But none of us is in our entirety the successor to Jesus. Right? We're each parts of the body. Here, Moses and Joshua are parts of the ministry of Jesus. Moses is here, the dying Jesus. He delivers his people out of slavery. Slavery to Egypt, slavery to sin. And he dies in the process. We saw that all God's servants die, and that includes that wounded for our transgressions servant that Isaiah foresaw. Moses here shows us the dying Jesus who leaves no body behind to make a shrine to, because we don't worship the dead. Joshua too portrays Jesus. Yeshua portrays Yeshua. Joshua portrays the risen Jesus who delivers God's people into their inheritance. Got it? Moses is the dying Jesus delivering his people from sin. Joshua is the risen Jesus delivering his people into salvation, into what they've been waiting for. What are you waiting for? Wait and see. Wait and see for the summary. Verses 10 to 12 are the summary of Moses' life. Just 3 verses. Moses' entire life, 120 years, is the great man in Israel, is summed up in 3 verses at the end of this chapter. It says, there's not arisen a prophet like Moses, not yet anyway, at the time this is written. Implied in that is that one day there will be one, like what Moses himself described earlier in this book in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 15. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet, Moses saying, a prophet like me, from among you. It's to him you shall listen. But for now, Deuteronomy says, he's not arisen yet. We're still waiting. For now, Moses says, you have to wait. Moses was special in the Old Testament. Now, others would hear from God. Other prophets, like Isaiah and Jeremiah, they would hear from God in visions and dreams, get words. But Moses knew the Lord says face to face. The prophet who's like Moses, here the one they're waiting on, would also know the Father face to face. Indeed, he would be the only begotten God. Other prophets might do occasional miracles, like Elijah and Elisha, stopping the rain, causing a poor woman to be able to have enough food, even with just a little bit of flour, even raising the dead. But most Old Testament prophets didn't do signs and wonders. Most of them didn't do miracles. Maybe a few occasions do a sign here and there, but that's about it. Moses did miracles of mighty power. It says great deeds of terror, that is of awe, that induce awe, just amazement when you see them. Think of the hail falling from the sky, the sun blotted out, all the 10 plagues are literally, the word is blows against Egypt, and finally dividing the Red Sea, causing it to collapse again on the pursuing Egyptian army. This is all summarizing Moses' career, his life. And these last 3 verses is how Deuteronomy summarizes Moses' life while they wait for another prophet like him. Our lives will be summarized, maybe on a gravestone or an obituary or in a short eulogy at a funeral. But your life will be boiled down to just a few words. I saw one gravestone that said, she was a good Baptist. I think I'd prefer Christian. Now, some might have only their birth and their death dates, or maybe that they served in the military and their rank in some war, or maybe beloved mother, or something like that. Some obituaries might list all your relatives, your church membership, or for those who aren't members anywhere, that they are, quote, of the Baptist faith. Although you have to wonder how much of the Baptist faith they're in if they're not members, but something like that. Eulogies are often bland flattery, right? But your life will be reduced to a summary. And there will be, like for Moses here, a divine, a true summary that lasts beyond all our flattery. What will it be? Well, wait and see. If you don't spend your life waiting for the not yet, waiting for what you can't see, if you live refusing to wait, as if everything is now you must get more money, now you must seize every pleasure, every cent, everything is now. Nothing is worth waiting for. Certainly not waiting your whole life for. If that's how you live, the summary of your life will not be good. Not the true summary. Moses was God's servant, and he had to wait. He had to wait his whole life. Now, sure, he had some promises fulfilled now, but even in death, he's outside the not yet promised land. But waiting is not forever. Hebrews 3 says that Moses was a faithful servant in God's house, testifying to things that were to come later. Here, in Deuteronomy, telling us that there's another prophet like him who is coming. That other prophet who is coming, Moses is the servant in God's house. That other prophet will be the son over God's house. And Moses met that son on the Mount of Transfiguration in Luke chapter 9, verse 30, along with Elijah. Moses was finally in the promised land, speaking with a prophet like him, greater than him. And they spoke about it. It literally says there in Luke chapter 9, they spoke about the Exodus which Jesus, the Son, was about to accomplish. Moses led the Exodus out of slavery. Jesus led the Exodus out of sin and death. We don't have to wait for that prophet anymore. We don't have to wait for that Exodus. We can see it. We have to wait for less now. But yet still, there are things for which we have to wait. We have to wait for our own Exodus out of death to life. Now, sure, we have part of it already, and we can see the rest, but still, we must wait for it all. But just you wait and see. It will come. So now, are you waiting for him?